Hi, how's it going? This is Resident of Collingwood for YouTube, and I'm here to continue my read-along review of The Dark Shadows Daybook, written by Patrick Mccray. I'm on episode 416, well, page 65. Episode 416. In the wake of Sarah's death, Barnabas Collins has one more life to eliminate. His own. Joshua Lewis Edmonds. Desperate for an answer to his daughter's death, Joshua confronts Victoria, who admits to being from the future. Her statement falls on deaf ears. Barnabas, aware of the engine of suffering he has become, instructs Ben to destroy him. I don't think it's any big secret that the Dark Shadow scripts didn't really demand much of Lewis Edmonds. You can't say that he's a lazy actor by any means. He has a bag of tricks that the writers clearly enjoy, because they largely restrict his choices to those. But there are times when it's clear that they sit back and remember why he was hired. This is one of those times. It's an episode that defines the hope of death while immersed in the torment it creates for the living. The beauty of a show like Dark Shadows is that its luxurious and expensive running time allows it to focus on rituals like death with a length and depth that only real life can match. Not only is Sarah dead, but we feel as if we have spent several days mourning for her. And while Naomi slips into drinking and open acceptance, Joshua, stripped of control, seeks the very thing he has lost. At this point, the only control left is blame. It's a painful, pathetic attempt. He attacks Vicky. Vicky comes out of the closet as a time traveler, and for just a flash you know that he believes her. It makes as much sense as anything, if not more, but believing her means blaming someone else, and his mind simply cannot broach another mystery. Watching Lewis Edmonds in this episode is a bit like watching Zeus at his full wrath. From what I understand, Edmonds was a happy and benevolent man. Don't trust it. The merriest among us, and I'm sure this won't come as a shock, are the rifest with secret pain. I don't need a tell-all to reveal that. The power and truth and pain and fury that he displays in this episode is too controlled and too authentic to be reflective of the imagination. I don't know what dark inner horror Edmonds saw when he looked at the words of the script, but he summoned something bordering on the alchemical, far from histrionic. This is simply real. It's even subtle and modulated somewhere between a man performing an exorcism and winning a bet over whether or not he can act. He can act. Anyone off that soundstage. There's a lot in 1795 that just kind of sits there. It can be interminable, and at the same time it contains the show at its rawest. This episode is the most painful study in survivors' remorse. Barnabas, in death, finds himself more alive than ever. Reduced to the means of evil to survive, he discovers a depth of responsibility, morality, that would shame a saint. while his mother is the only thing that stops him from hornswoggling the local yokels into assuming that he is also the occult source of their ills. Barnabas has lived out the fantasy of seeing his own funeral, and sees it for the nightmare it is. His mother is suffering it all over again, trapped in the unnatural fever dream of burying her second child in weeks. Were Barnabas to reveal himself and take the fall, it would force her to live that fate for a third time. As Louis Edmonds explores the peaks of the landscape of sorrow, Jonathan Frid and Thayer David plunge down to the white-hot mantle of remorse. How many times must Barnabas hear that Ben is his friend before he believes it? And how many times does Ben need to hear his master beg for just one single yes before he can let go? As much as Barnabas is a hero for trying to eliminate himself from Collinsport suffering, the plight of Ben Stokes is even more profound. He is incapable of seeing anything but the friend within. Every day brings a new truth and a new terror for him. But in the face of the questionable motives of so many others in 1795, his is pure. In many ways, he is one of the two greatest loves Barnabas Collins will ever know and never accept. And he can very well go to his grave knowing no other. In fact, I guarantee it. Episode 446. When Barnabas reveals his nocturnal activities to Joshua, will the patriarch find the inspiration to shoot Joshua? Louis Edmonds. When Joshua learns of Barnabas's curse, he trusts his son to kill himself honorably. Meanwhile, the patriarch leads a confused Naomi back to Collinwood after dealing with a subtle blackmail attempt from Nathan Forbes. Joshua rounds out the day by shooting Barnabas. Welcome home, otherness. All horror deals with the dance between the scared and the profane, but this show heightens the tension by defining the scared as the burgeoning American civilization for all of its continental finery. The Collins are quintessential Yankee. As Quentin tells Barnabas, there is no English branch of the family. The Collinses are wealthy, landed, sophisticated, and live in a castle forged from the hard-won fruits of capitalism, cloaking them in the sanctuary of economic power, makes them even more American than the Cleavers, because by God, they made something of themselves. In theory, these are the last people deserving of the profane. Confronting them with horror is to confront America with horror. They react with a predictable mix of denial and shock. But other than display buckwheat and fright, what else is the scared supposed to do when the profane decides to stretch out on the couch, grab the remote, and announce it's there to stay? Exactly, not much. And electing fear is often a limit on horror, unless it isn't, and it leads to genuine self-reflection. Call it turgid or call it intellectual, but in Collinsport, horror speaks and horror listens. Barnabas speaks and Joshua listens. The vice versa. perhaps we can thank the structures of standards and practices, or the speed of small pace of soap opera storytelling. Either way, that chance of dialogue, for a dialogue, is a chance to pause and think about what gives the profane its profanity. To this generation, fewer things were as profane as the other. When Barnabas fesses up to Joshua about what he's become, substitute anything uncomfortable for vampire, and you'll see what I mean. In the words of John Wayne, homosexuality is the obvious choice. But the idea of otherness is hardly restricted to that. What's amazing is that while Joshua obviously rejects his son's new diet, he doesn't fully reject his son. It would be on call for a permanent figure in a narrative, much less a human, is an eventual rejection, inevitable, maybe, but Joshua tries everything in between. And by everything, I largely mean encouraging his son to kill himself, even when Joshua pulls the trigger instead. It's as much to test Barnabas' inhumanity as to end it. Few suffer like Joshua, and with standards like his, he sets himself up for it. But these standards are tempered by a depth of reluctant compassion that few on the program share. These are traits to his son that his son will inherit as he manages his own ad hoc family of Julia and Willie in the 20th century. Like so much in Dark Shadows, Joshua reaches ferocious extremes in the attempt to rationalize. In this case, it's to rationalize not killing the monster Barnabas has become. For all of its drama, it's a legitimately funny episode. Barnabas has some wonderful takes as he listens to Joshua's suggestions that a fair trial would clear all of this up. The laughs continue later when Barnabas tries to coax Joshua into saying the V word, as if they were contestants on the occult version of the $20,000 pyramid. But the episode is hardly about just Joshua. He shares the focus with his son Barnabas. Plight demands the viewers see events through his eyes. Also, because this isn't a valid metaphor for something like homosexuality. This is about a life based upon death. These choices have a cruel honesty to them. And we come back to the post-revolutionary Americanism of the show. Barnabas is feeding off of the poor. Class differences have already dehumanized them in the eyes of his social echelon. Yes, abusing the working class is an outrage. His fellows might opine, but that's why God invented them. Barnabas shocks his own culture by amplifying that implication into the literal, and he does so in the frankest way, using his leisures as raw, bloody substance. Oh well, can't be helped. Maybe that's the secret reason that Barnabas is alternatively cold and passionate about his crimes. He is outraged that he doesn't care more. Barnabas' attacks correspond less, and his biological needs, and more with his emotional life. It's not always feeding, and it's clear that he doesn't really need to. In fact, he stops himself with a little consequence in nourishment in numerous episodes. Often he seems to be rationalizing crimes because they may not be rooted in survival. When he speaks with Joshua in this episode, he's ultimately looking for a final mercy, or at least his understanding. Instead, he gets chained in a coffin until the Lyndon Johnson administration. In the face of Joshua's reaction, Barnabas spends most of the series atoning for his dark impulses. The locals misconstrue his acts, maybe for their own sanity, and write them off as a work of a mere serial killer. The Collinsport Strangler. I added that last part. The Collinsport Strangler. That's what they call the attacks that are happening in 1795. The Collinsport Strangler. So you put that. Sorry, I didn't read the next part. I'm sorry. Is that it? Barnabas enjoys the taste of human blood, but does he need it? How often do we see him suffer a lot suffer emotionally from starvation, especially when there are other treats afoot. But if Barnabas doesn't really need to drain human blood to survive, maybe a serial killer is what he actually is. And what does that leave us? I'll try not to suffocate under this vintage Soviet flag, as I suggest that the real horror may be this. The American aristocracy isn't vampirism, the underclass, because they need to. It's just scratching a deeply satisfying itch to reinforce superiority and deny their own atrophy. Hey, don't blame me. Take it to the writers. Barnabas acquires a 1,000-yard stare when contemplating his crimes, begging for Joshua to end him. Is that because he couldn't help it, or that he could? Hi guys, I want to show you this artwork too. Check that out. Check out the bats. That is awesome. That is so cool. Episode 460. 1795 concludes as a dead man becomes a reluctant time traveler, and a reluctant time traveler confronts what may be her final moments. Victoria Winter's Alexander Moltke. After surviving Forbes' crossbow bolt, Barnabas kills the sailor. He then implores Joshua to destroy him, free Miss Winters, and liberate Ben Stokes. Joshua only succeeds in the latter. Instead, he has Barnabas sealed in his coffin under a silver cross and chains. Victoria's case is too far gone. She hangs as a witch, but Peter's vow to find her in time echoes in her ears as the noose tightens. We turn our eye to 1795 for the final time. Instead of pulling back to give us a widescreen view of the world of dark shadows, it pushes us in on 4 sets of faces, 4 relationships, 4 models of our best choices. The order of those relationships flows with an organic necessity in an almost Messalinian ancestral. Barnabas and Forbes, Joshua and Barnabas, Ben and Joshua, and Peter and Victoria. There are relationships that end in defining choices. justice, compassion, respect, optimism. Justice, Forbes chooses to murder, and Barnabas chooses to protect himself and others. Compassion, Barnabas chooses to end his own life while liberating the deserving, and Joshua chooses the cowardly unknown rather than a bravely bleak certainty. Respect, Ben chooses fealty to social order, and Joshua disrupts that order by meddling with the class structure he so thoroughly represents. Optimism. The episode concludes Peter and Victoria's romance with a sense of optimistic mission instead of regret. Hard to do when the last image is a dropped noose, or is it so difficult after all? We already know that the future is a safer place for the family, friendship, love, and avoiding a crossbow bolts. There is as much delight through the darkness as despair. The persistent optimism will push Collingwood through its most troubling nights between 1795 and 1968, creating the yin-yang of doom and hope that drives the series. If Gothic literature is about the inevitable of decomposition, Dark Shadows is wrongly pigeonholed in that genre. It is rather anti-Gothic. Liz should have committed suicide. Joshua should have staked Barnabas and shot himself. Quentin should be the one dead in the sealed room. The widow should be at rest, for an empty Collingwood is devoid of those to taunt or haunt. None of these is the case. Liz volunteers to be a prisoner. If she's punishing herself, it means that she matters. It's one thing to be unworthy of existence. Forbes is unworthy of existence. Liz, however, is worthy of the recovery that follows a correction. Barnabas is worthy of a similar chance. He survives 1795 due to Joshua's cowardice. But is it cowardice or love? I think we know. Joshua is the most decisive Collins that the program will present. If he is a coward, he is made one by love. If that prevents him from meting out justice, we understand maybe he simply knows something beyond what his rigid outlook would suggest. Perhaps Joshua privately knows that in a world of justice and consequence, some people simply screw up or are in the wrong place at the wrong time, or are victims of passion, but they are not all violently evil. Simply haunted by the past, sometimes distant, sometimes not. If any force moves the characters on Dark Shadows, it is the past, and there's only one path for its exorcism. If the past is a puzzle to be solved, it requires embracing the present. Quentin may have been a father so negligent that his children were kept secret from him, but once he discovers this, he can guard Jameson, Nora, and even Edward, because Barnabas can change. He can also credit Angelique with the same capacity, loving she is rather than hating who she was. Circling back to Joshua, He may be too sentimental to end Barnabas's life, but his refusal comes with the hope and confidence that the future will solve the crisis of the present. Is this what these men think as they look at each other one last time? Their final moments in 1795 are simple gazes. They say more than all the dialogue in the episode. As Faulkner would advise, I believe they decline to accept the end of man. For an installment where the heroine is hanged until dead by a corrupt and superstitious society, and where the hero, longing for death, is sentenced to an unlivable existence with a torturous curse, sealed in the smallest space possible under chains within a hidden room behind a door. No one knows, a door protected by a lock that no one knows is a lock, all under the symbol of a God whose image is excruciating. Well, on Dark Shadows, those are not perils, they're possibilities. Sorry. Oh, look at that. Look at that. Oh, guys. I'll show you guys. The lighting is so horrible. You guys see that? See that artwork? That is beautiful. Look at the skull. Can you see? I need to get extra lighting in here is what I need to do. This is actually where I'll be starting tomorrow. I'm going to cut this short because I'm getting into 1968. But check out this artwork as I do. I know I didn't go long tonight, but I will be doing a bunch of this tomorrow, starting with 1968. So, I hope you guys enjoyed the read-along for tonight. I'm enjoying this immensely. I really love the artwork, and I love the, to me, what I take away most from this book is that it is a love letter to Dark Shadows. But to me, in my opinion, it's also a love letter to its fans, because it was done by two fans. You know, Patrick Mccray and Wallace McBride. And I love it for that. It's really great. Guys, link to where you can get the Dark Shadows Daybook will be in the description box. As always, I'll see you guys tomorrow. I am going to do a ton of read-alongs for this tomorrow throughout the day. So, I hope you guys enjoy your night. You have a great night.